The glass did not only break on the Clifton Road in Atlanta but broke a sense of security over one of the most critical institutes of public health in America. Thursday late in the afternoon of 8th August 2025, a gunman opened fire at the headquarters of the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, spraying hundreds of rounds to the building where scientists monitor outbreaks and design campaigns to vaccinate large sections of the population. It had the feel of a war zone in minutes. Shattered windows, alarms going off, folks hunkering under desks, and phones illuminated with "Browse the shelter-in-place" messages. Police officer David Rose was 33 years old and served in DeKalb County, was dealt with at the scene and was killed. The shooter then committed suicide. It was rapid, it was focused, and it made the CDC and the country ask tough questions about how it happened. We got here. The chronology was cruel and accurate. At about 4:50 p.m., Amory Point, a mixed-use facility which shares borders with CDC campus and Emory University, reported shots fired. Erie campus alerts read, "Run, hide, fight." The shooter opened fire onto police, converging to the area of various CDC buildings. Over 500 shell casings were also recovered by investigators, and it was estimated that approximately 180 bullets had been fired into the actual campus. During the confusion, officer David Rose got shot dead. Before more officers could get closer to him, the gunman committed suicide. All the interaction took a time that seemed infinitely long and still too terribly short. At night, the damage was speaking for itself. 6 structures were stained. Approximately 150 windows were shattered or blown in, some of them specially made to be blast-proof, and yet succumbing to the repeated smashes. More than 100 doors were spoiled, either shot to shivers or crash-raised in emergency searches. The walls of the CDC, made of mirrored glass, were speckled in the outside with starbursts. Patrick Joseph White was found to be the shooter. Some of the documents that were recovered in his home saw him rant about COVID-19 vaccines and accusing them of causing his mental health problems. That obsession seems to have crystallized into an intention. Violent demonstrations, specifically targeting the highest official public health agency of the country. Police report that he was prevented to drive on the campus and thus had to shoot outside of the perimeter. It was intentional, it was selective, and it made the CDC frontage a firing line. It was not senseless viciousness. This was an assault on the CDC, symbolically, to get the human angle on it. Begin with Officer David Rose. He had 2 children and another in the womb, and a young cop eagerly sprinting into danger because that is what his badge wanted. The men who fought under him would tell of quiet composure and a sure touch. In a tragedy that is structured around some bullets shot, glass broken, his narrative causes us to confront the priceless worth of an individual life. The biggest reminder of what had been lost is his death. The emotional shock within the CDC was raw and instant. These workers have long been harassed, threatened implicitly, sometimes even despised, because of what they are doing, namely tracking pathogens, vaccination recommendation, and issuing health guidelines that are commonly made political. Employees would talk of sadness and frustration and utter exhaustion following the shooting. During a brief all-hands meeting, new CDC director did not hide the fact that misinformation can be hazardous and that the trust must be restored. However, what was not welcome is that a lot of employees believed that the communication was too little, too late, and too polished to a situation that required sincere directness. Several writings made by the shooter indicated a deadly blend of conspiracy claims and the feeling of despair. That mix of grievance and misinformation has been frightfully familiar. The heads of the public health community criticized the attack and alerted that health worker harassment has been going on, and as such, years have led to it being normalized as a climate. That violence is acceptable to some and seen as a distorted form of activism. The shooting of the CDC was not only a lone incident. It was the bloodshed result of a storm cloud which had been gathering through the years. The blast fervor politically radiated well outside Atlanta. A high number of employees were very frustrated with the popular voices whose rhetoric has contributed to the mistrust of health institutions. They called out farther explicitly denunciations against violence and the ceasing of the continual drumbeat of innuendo behind the CDC as an enemy as opposed to a partner in public health. In condemning the attack, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. visited the shattered site. However, employees desired words to be complemented with more. They wished leaders to recalibrate the way they discuss science and those who are involved. In its practice, there were also security concerns that were prominent. How could one shooter come to be so close to the 6 buildings that he was able to spray them? To answer this, there are sure to be added cameras, heftier barriers, reworking of approach roads, and increased armed patrols. Could start to seem that the CDC is turning into something that resembles a fortress rather than a campus of scientists. Others within the agency also thought that national focus was quick to wear off. A dishonest attack on the CDC, they claimed, should have made the headlines even longer, at least in commemoration of Officer Rose, who died in the discharge of her duty, or to make a sober discussion be held about the safety of people working in the field of public health. In the fast-paced media cycle, however, the news appeared to be competing with the following day news. Almost promptly, that swiftness of that loss of attention was to most as disturbing as the broken windows. Now then, what is to be done with a story like that? To start with, we want to call the cause by its real name. Disinformation is murder. It distorts reality, leaves vulnerable individuals in solitude, and legitimizes anger. That does not mean we no longer want debate. It is not to prohibit discussion, but the demand is to provide evidence, to vet assertions, and not to turn expertise into a partisan identity. Second, we resource the shield. Defending the infrastructure of public health is not a choice, it is a national security. Armored fences, instant alerts, and practice exercises must become norms of big health campuses in the nation. Third, we bring to life humanity of those behind the walls of the CDC. They are not soulless officials, but are people who live next to us, lives as scientists or parents, and live to preserve our lives. The more subliminal lesson is this: institutions can absorb a lot and continue to progress on, provided the sheep within trust each other. In the attack after days, the lab teams reunited. Managers inquired on the employees and grief counselors conducted back-to-back sessions. Was not a parole. A few all-hands meetings were too scripted, policy memos were not direct enough as they wanted. The mission, however, never stopped. Outbreaks of sickness do not wait to mourn. The preparation of pathogen tracking continued even with tapes on windows and plywood on frames. When hottest headlines go away and the glass is replaced, it is left with decisions. Leaders have the ability to be accountable rather than defensive, as well as be clear rather than ambiguous. It is within the control of media to report such attacks in depth they should receive, as opposed to such cases being lost in the wastes of the day-to-day news. Societies have the option of supporting their government officials not just by clapping but monitoring their representatives by tackling misinformation and exposing liars by thwarting dangerous acts and holding people spreading the rumors as liable as well. Well, we as audience also have a choice. We do remember in name Officer David Rose. We may view the CDC as a single unit, but based on the thousands of people in the organization, trying to do the difficult, required work to allow the rest of society to live safely. The cancerous notion that violence can ever form an answer to policy disagreements can be discredited. This shooting at CDC was aimed to intimidate and silence. The strongest answer to give is to say no to both. Defend those who defend us, and do not yield to lies that would destroy them and break truths and science.